There are moments on live television that can never be erased. A single misplaced word, an ill-timed glance, a split second of lost composure. Just like that, an entire career crumbles. That night, millions of viewers tuned in for what seemed like another routine political debate, but within minutes, everything would spiral out of control. A seasoned TV host, a man who had grilled hundreds of politicians throughout his career, made a fatal mistake. And sitting across from him was none other than Clint Eastwood, the legendary Hollywood icon turned political commentator. Hey there, friends! Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss our upcoming content filled with compelling stories just like this one. Now let's dive back into this extraordinary tale. The studio lights blazed overhead as James Calloway, one of America's most respected political commentators, prepared for what he thought would be just another evening of debate. But facing Clint Eastwood was different. This wasn't just any guest. This was a man who had commanded respect both on the silver screen and in the political arena for over half a century. The topic seemed simple enough. Is the media truly fair? But beneath that question lay decades of tension, mistrust, and deep political divides. The production team made their final checks, cameras were set, and the show's signature intro music played. No one in that control room, no one in the newsroom, and certainly none of the millions of viewers knew they were about to witness one of the most explosive moments in live television history. Eastwood sat there, his weathered face carrying the gravitas of his years in Hollywood and politics. His presence alone commanded attention, the same presence that had made him a legend in films like Dirty Harry and Unforgiven. But tonight, he wasn't playing a role. He was here to discuss something he had observed firsthand, the transformation of American media. Thank you for joining us tonight, Mr. Eastwood, Calloway began, his practiced smile barely masking his nervousness. I know our audience is eager to hear your perspective. Eastwood's response was characteristically measured, delivered with that familiar gravelly voice that had captivated audiences for generations. Well, James, when you've been in both entertainment and politics as long as I have, you see things for what they really are. And what I see in today's media landscape, well, it ain't pretty. The tension in the studio was palpable. Calloway, known for his aggressive interviewing style, seemed slightly off balance. He was used to dealing with politicians and pundits. But Eastwood was different. This was a man who had seen the media evolve over decades, who had been both its darling and its critic. You've been critical of mainstream media's coverage of conservative viewpoints, Calloway pressed. But isn't it possible that your perspective is clouded by your own political beliefs? Eastwood's eyes narrowed slightly. That famous squint that had intimidated countless screen villains now focused on Calloway. You know, in my day, reporters reported facts. They didn't try to shape the narrative. They didn't try to tell people what to think. They just laid out the truth and let folks decide for themselves. The exchange continued to escalate, with Calloway growing increasingly aggressive and Eastwood maintaining his composed demeanor. It was like watching a master class in control. The more Calloway pushed, the calmer Eastwood became, until finally the moment that would change everything arrived. Frustrated by Eastwood's unflappable responses and perhaps forgetting who he was dealing with, Calloway made the mistake that would end his career. Maybe if conservatives like you spent less time complaining about media bias and more time actually contributing to society, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The studio fell silent. The control room froze. Millions of viewers held their breath. But Eastwood, he just leaned forward slightly, fixed Calloway with that legendary stare, and in his signature style, quietly asked, "Go ahead, make my day. Would you like to clarify exactly what you mean by that?" The silence that followed Eastwood's challenge seemed to stretch for an eternity. In the control room, producers exchanged panicked glances. On social media, clips of the exchange were already beginning to spread like wildfire. But it was Eastwood's response that would be remembered for years to come. "You know, James," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades in the public eye. "I've spent over 60 years entertaining people, serving as a mayor, creating thousands of jobs, and contributing millions to charity. I've seen this country change, grow, and face challenges. And I've watched as people like you, sitting behind desks, decided they knew better than the American people what the truth should be. Calloway, visibly uncomfortable, attempted to backtrack. Mr. Eastwood, I didn't mean to suggest— Oh, but you did, Eastwood cut him off, his voice remaining eerily calm. You meant exactly what you said. And that's the problem with today's media. You say what you really think, then try to dance around it when called out. Well, I'm too old and been around too long to play that game. Within hours of the broadcast, the incident had become a social media sensation. Hashtags like Eastwood's media and Calloway cancel began trending worldwide. Clips of the exchange, particularly Eastwood's "Go ahead, make my day" response, were being shared millions of times across all platforms. The reaction was swift and unprecedented. Major sponsors began pulling their advertising from Calloway's show. Conservative voices rallied behind Eastwood, while media critics debated whether Calloway's comment revealed a deeper bias in mainstream journalism. But what made this situation different from other media controversies was Eastwood's stature. This wasn't just any conservative voice. This was Clint Eastwood, a cultural icon whose career spanned over half a century. Inside the network's headquarters, emergency meetings were being held around the clock. Executives paced corridors, phones rang incessantly, and crisis management teams worked overtime to contain the damage. But the situation was quickly spiraling beyond their control. By morning, the story had evolved beyond just another cancel culture debate. It had become a referendum on media bias, on respect for different viewpoints, and on the treatment of conservative voices in mainstream media. And at the center of it all stood Clint Eastwood, who maintained a dignified silence as the controversy raged. The network's advertisers were the first to react. Within 24 hours, 3 major corporations had pulled their sponsorship. Their statements were diplomatic but clear. We support open dialogue and respect for all viewpoints. The message between the lines was obvious. Calloway's comment had crossed a line. As pressure mounted, the network faced an impossible choice: stand by their veteran host or cut him loose to save their brand. The decision came swiftly and decisively. Less than 48 hours after the incident, James Calloway was fired. The official statement was brief. After careful review of recent events, we have decided to part ways with James Calloway. We thank him for his years of service and wish him the best in his future endeavors. But the real story was just beginning. Eastwood's response to Calloway's firing was characteristic of the man himself: measured, thoughtful, and surprisingly compassionate. In a rare public statement, he said, "I take no pleasure in seeing anyone lose their job, but there's a lesson here about responsibility and respect in journalism. Maybe now we can have a real conversation about media bias." The statement only enhanced Eastwood's standing in the public eye. Here was a man who, even in victory, showed grace and wisdom. News networks clamored for interviews, but Eastwood chose his appearances carefully. When he did speak, it was always with the same message: the need for honest, unbiased journalism. Meanwhile, Calloway wasn't going quietly into the night. A week after his firing, he announced the launch of his own digital media platform, the Calloway Report. His first broadcast was a fiery denouncement of what he called conservative intimidation of the media. But his attempts to reframe the narrative fell flat. The public had seen the unedited exchange, and Eastwood's measured response had already won the day. The incident sparked a national conversation about media bias that extended far beyond the original exchange. Journalism schools began using the clip as a teaching tool about professional ethics. Media organizations started reviewing their internal policies about political discourse. And through it all, Eastwood's influence grew. He began receiving invitations to speak at journalism conferences, not as an actor or politician, but as a voice of reason in an increasingly polarized media landscape. His message was consistent. The media's job isn't to tell people what to think. It's to give them the facts and trust them to think for themselves. 6 months after the infamous exchange, the media landscape had shifted noticeably. The Eastwood effect, as it came to be known, had created a new standard for political discourse on television. Networks became more conscious of their hosts' behavior, and a new emphasis was placed on respectful dialogue across political divides. Clint Eastwood, now more influential than ever in his ninth decade, had become an unexpected champion of media reform. His own production company began developing a documentary series about the history of American journalism, from the founding fathers to the digital age. The project attracted top talents from both conservative and liberal media backgrounds, all drawn by Eastwood's vision of balanced, honest reporting. James Calloway's The Calloway Report struggled to find its footing in the digital space. Despite initial interest, viewers were drawn more to Eastwood's message of respectful dialogue than Calloway's confrontational style. By the end of the year, his subscriber base had dwindled, and the platform was struggling financially. The incident's most lasting impact, however, was on public discourse itself. The phrase, "Would you like to clarify that?" became a popular response to controversial statements, a callback to Eastwood's composed questioning of Calloway. It represented a new approach to handling disagreements, not with outrage or personal attacks, but with calm, direct questioning. Media organizations began implementing what they called Eastwood rules, guidelines for respectful political discourse that emphasize listening over confrontation, facts over opinion, and respect over ratings. The rules weren't official policy, but they represented a cultural shift in how political discussions were conducted on air. As for Eastwood himself, he continued to make occasional appearances on news programs, each time drawing massive audiences eager to hear his perspective. His age seemed to lend weight to his words, as he often reminded viewers that he had seen the media evolve from the golden age of television to the digital era. "The truth," he would often say in these appearances, "is like a good Western. It's not about who can shout the loudest or shoot the fastest. It's about standing your ground, staying true to your principles, and letting your actions speak for themselves." The story of that night, when a Hollywood legend faced down media bias with nothing more than calm questioning and decades of earned gravitas, became more than just another viral moment. It became a turning point in American media history, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to provocation is simply to ask, "Would you like to clarify that?" And so, what began as a controversial exchange on a nightly news program evolved into something much more significant, a masterclass in handling conflict, a lesson in media responsibility, and a reminder that even in our most divided times, dignity and respect can still win the day.